If my wife swore it was only a harmless work dinner with her boss of 40 years, why did his wife leave me a voicemail 10 minutes after my friendly text, like she was waiting for it, and like someone already decided I was the problem? My name is Adrian Cole, and I learned a long time ago that people will say almost anything when they want permission to do something shameful while still demanding to be seen as decent. Mara stood in our kitchen with her coat already on, perfume too fresh for a routine Tuesday, and she delivered the line like a rehearsed promise instead of a casual detail. She said it was just a work dinner with her boss, and she told me not to be jealous because he had been married for 40 years, as if longevity was a lock on temptation and not simply proof that someone knows how to keep secrets. I looked at her the way you look at a glass you suspect has a crack, not angry, not pleading, just checking whether the fracture runs all the way through. She kept her eyes on me longer than she needed to, waiting for the reaction she could later describe to friends as controlling, unstable, or pathetic. I did not give her any of those options. I smiled, because my face is the one thing I have full control over, and I told her to have a nice evening, because I wanted the lie to pass cleanly through the air without giving it the dignity of a fight. Mara relaxed a fraction, the way a thief relaxes when the dog stays asleep. She moved toward the door, then paused as if she remembered she had to maintain the illusion of being considerate. She kissed my cheek, light and quick, and I could tell she was already elsewhere in her head, already walking into a different version of herself, the one who laughs too loudly at a man's jokes because laughter is a kind of currency. She asked if I needed anything from the store on her way back, because even betrayal likes to wear a polite mask. I told her no, and I watched her leave, and the house felt immediately quieter, as if her footsteps had been holding up the ceiling. The kids were at my sister's for a sleepover, which was supposed to be a simple blessing, but in that moment it felt like the universe clearing the room for something ugly. I walked to the window and waited for her car to pull away. And when it did, I did not chase it, because chasing is a language liars understand too well. I went back to the kitchen table and sat down with my phone in my hand, like it weighed more than it should. I knew the name of the boss, of course. Grant Halden. Everyone in her department said it like a brand. Grant this, Grant that, Grant's standards, Grant's calendar, Grant's reputation. Mara had always spoken about him with that careful respect that is half admiration and half fear, which is another way of saying she had always been willing to be shaped by him. I also knew his wife's name because the company liked to show off stability the way a restaurant shows off a clean kitchen. Elise Halden. She had appeared in photos at charity events, standing beside Grant with a smile so controlled it looked like a signature. Mara had shown me those photos before, casually, the way you show someone a landmark, but now I could see she had been planting that image in my head. 40 years, stable marriage, harmless dinner. I typed the message to Elise slowly, because words are evidence the second you send them. I kept it neutral, almost boring, the kind of message no one could twist into a threat without looking ridiculous. I wrote that I had heard Mara was having a one-on-one dinner with Grant, and that I found it interesting, and I left it there, with no accusation, no demand, no insult, just a small pin pressed into a balloon. I sent it and placed the phone on the table. I did not pace. I did not drink. I did not call Mara. I just waited, because waiting is a weapon when the other side thinks you are desperate. I listened to the house, to the refrigerator hum, to the faint tick of the wall clock, to my own breath settling into something steady. I told myself I did not care what Elise would say, because I had already made my point, and the point was not to start a war with a stranger. The point was to put a light on the dinner table and see who flinched. 10 minutes later, my phone buzzed and buzzed again, and my stomach tightened as if it had been trained to recognize the sound of trouble. It was not a text, it was a voicemail notification, and the number was not saved, but the area code matched Grant's world. I stared at the screen for a moment, and it felt absurdly intimate, like someone had reached into my kitchen without knocking. I tapped play, and Elise Halden's voice filled the room, clear and controlled, with a polite edge that could cut paper. She did not introduce herself in a warm way, and she did not sound surprised to be calling me. She sounded like a woman who had been waiting for the excuse to make this call, the way a person waits for a fire alarm before opening a locked door. She said my message was inappropriate. She said Grant was a family man. She said Mara was a valued employee. She said I should not involve myself in their professional environment. Her tone was calm, but her words moved like a line being drawn in sand, and I could hear something else beneath it, something that did not fit the image of a loyal spouse defending her marriage. I could hear rehearsal, I could hear structure, I could hear the kind of certainty that only comes from having already discussed what to say. When the voicemail ended, the kitchen seemed louder, not quieter. The refrigerator hum sounded like a generator. The clock tick sounded like a countdown. I replayed the voicemail once, then again, not because I enjoyed it, but because repetition reveals patterns. Elise's pauses were deliberate. Her emphasis landed on the same key phrases each time. Professional environment, family man, inappropriate, valued employee. I saved the voicemail and took a screenshot of the timestamp, because if you do not hold on to the time, you lose the shape of the lie. I took a screenshot of my call log showing the incoming voicemail. I wrote the exact time on a sticky note and pressed it to the inside cover of a folder I kept for household bills, because there is something deeply satisfying about using ordinary tools for extraordinary truth. Then my phone rang again, and I did not answer. It rang twice more, and I still did not answer. A string of messages arrived from numbers I did not recognize, short and sharp, like the kind people send when they want to overwhelm your judgment. I did not open them. I did not need the content yet. The flood itself was the content. The fact that my neutral message produced an immediate coordinated response was a confession disguised as anger. I sat there for a long moment, staring at my own hands on the table, thinking about how fast a private marriage becomes a public performance when someone wants to control the narrative. I thought about Mara's smile in the kitchen. I thought about her little kiss on my cheek. I thought about the way she had said 40 years like it was a shield. And I thought about Elise's voicemail, arriving like a warning flare, not to protect a marriage, but to protect a system. When Mara finally called me, her name lit up my screen like a dare. I let it ring until it stopped, and then I watched a text bubble appear and disappear, as if she could not decide which version of herself to send me. When her message finally arrived, it was a single sentence asking if everything was okay, and the politeness of it made my teeth ache. I did not answer. I placed the phone face down and went to the sink, turned on the water, and washed a clean glass as if I had all the time in the world. That is the part people do not understand about me until it is too late. I do not explode. I do not plead. I do not chase. I collect. I organize. I wait. And when I move with papers in my hand and a calm look on my face, because calm is the hardest thing to argue with. I looked at the folder I had started, the one that still smelled like printer toner and old receipts, and I realized I had just been handed the first piece of a larger machine. It was not only about Mara and Grant. It was about Elise, too, and about whatever agreement lived behind her voicemail. And if they thought they could scare me with a quick call and a few angry texts, then they had misread me in the most convenient way possible. I went back to the table and picked up my phone again, and this time I opened the messages. I read them without reacting. They were full of moral outrage, full of insults disguised as advice, full of warnings about consequences if I kept interfering. None of them said clearly that Mara and Grant were not together. None of them denied the dinner. They only attacked my right to notice it. I set the phone down and stared at the dark screen, and I felt something settle in me that did not feel like rage. It felt like focus. It felt like the moment a man realizes he is not dealing with a mistake, but with a structure. And structures do not fall because you scream at them. They fall because you remove the supports, one by one, until the whole thing collapses under its own weight. Mara came home later than she said she would, and when she walked through the door, she wore the satisfied fatigue of someone who had been fed attention all night. She tried to look casual, but her eyes were too alert, scanning me, scanning the room, checking for signs of anger, checking for signs of damage. People who expect peace do not scan. People who expect consequences do. She asked why I did not answer her calls, and she tried to make her voice light, as if my silence was childish and her dinner was adult. I told her I had been busy because that was true, just not in the way she imagined. She asked busy with what, and I shrugged, and that shrug bothered her more than any accusation would have. Accusations give her something to perform against. A shrug gives her nothing. Mara moved into the kitchen, opened the refrigerator, and pretended to look for something. She asked whether I had contacted anyone, and she said it like she was asking about a neighbor, but her body was tense, her shoulders slightly raised, the way people look when they are bracing for impact. I told her I had sent a polite message to Elise Halden, and I watched the moment her face tried to stay neutral and failed. She covered the slip quickly, forced a laugh, and said Elise was dramatic. She said Elise took everything personally. She said Elise had always been territorial, and she said it as if she was describing a harmless quirk in a family friend. Then she said Grant was furious that his wife was involved, as if that was the real injustice, that a wife had noticed her husband's dinner. I asked Mara why Elise had a voicemail ready 10 minutes after my text, and Mara's eyes narrowed in that brief way that shows the mind working faster than the mouth. She said Elise was always on her phone. She said Elise liked to control Grant's life. She said it was nothing. Nothing. Again, the word liars love, because it demands you accept emptiness as explanation. I nodded as if I believed her, because my belief was irrelevant. What mattered was what she would say next. She told me I was being jealous and unfair. She told me I did not trust her. She told me she could not breathe in this marriage when I acted like this. She stacked the phrases quickly, like someone building a wall before the questions return. And I recognized the rhythm, because I had just heard it in Elise's voice. Different words, same structure. That night I slept on the couch, not as punishment, not as theater, but because I needed distance to think, and the bedroom felt compromised. Mara did not protest. She did not insist I come upstairs. She went up alone and left the hall light on, as if she wanted to be seen as the abandoned one. I stared at the ceiling and listened to the house settle, and I thought about the next 30 days, like they were a map I had to draw by hand. In the morning, while Mara showered, my phone lit up with a merchant notification from an account in my name, an alert I had set up years ago because I like to know where my money goes. The notification showed a restaurant charge that did not match the story of a simple dinner. It was not only a meal, it included add-ons that sounded like indulgence, extra bottles, extra courses, the kind of spending that comes with an audience or with an intention to impress. I did not confront her with it, because confrontation turns evidence into argument. I saved the notification. I took a screenshot and labeled it with the date, the time, and the merchant name. Then I opened my calendar app, the shared one we used for kids, for family, for life, and I scrolled through the week view. Mara had entered the dinner as a generic work item, nothing specific, no location, no names, just a block of time. But the next day, another block appeared, also generic, also too vague, also at a time that pressed against our routine. It was a pattern forming, not a mistake. I exported the week view as a PDF and saved it to a folder on my phone labeled Household, because even my file names needed to be boring. I wanted any outsider to look at it and see a man organizing his schedule, not a man plotting revenge. Because revenge is not what I was doing, not really. I was doing correction. I was pulling truth back into the lane it belonged in, the lane where consequences can reach it. Later that afternoon, Mara left for work, and came back later than usual, offering a cover story before I even asked. She said there had been a last-minute meeting. She said Grant needed her input on something urgent. She said the department was under pressure. She said the word urgent like it was a stamp, like it made her story official. I asked which conference room they used, and Mara blinked once, too fast. She said she could not remember. I asked which colleague was there, and Mara said it was mostly just her and Grant, and then she corrected herself and said another manager joined briefly. Briefly, the soft word people use when they want to smudge a timeline. I did not press. I simply nodded and watched her walk into the kitchen and set her bag down with unusual care, as if she was afraid something inside it might speak. When she went upstairs, I looked at the bag where it sat, heavy and innocent on the counter, and I felt the pull to search it. I did not. I did not need to. Searching would make me the story. Instead, I waited for her to make a mistake, because people who live in lies always make mistakes. They become careless. They get tired. They forget which version they told you last. That evening, I called my neighbor Tessa and asked about something unrelated, a small favor, a question about a package, a casual opening. Tessa was the kind of woman who noticed everything and said little, and she did not like Mara much, not openly, but in the quiet way you can feel in pauses. I did not accuse Mara to Tessa. I did not ask Tessa to watch anyone. I simply asked whether she had seen Mara's car last night, whether she had noticed anything unusual in our street traffic around dinner time. Tessa hesitated, then said she had seen Mara leave, and she had also seen a dark sedan behind her that she did not recognize, following at a distance that looked intentional. Tessa said she thought it was odd, and she remembered it because the sedan's headlights were too bright, and because it paused at the corner before turning the same way Mara turned. She gave me a time window, not exact, but close enough to anchor. I thanked her and wrote down the sentence, just as she said it, with the date and her first name only, because I was not building a case that required her to be dragged into court. I was building a case that required people to stop lying in rooms with policies. The next day at lunch, Mara's phone lit up on the table while she stood at the sink, and for a second, the lock screen preview flashed a name and a short line. The name was Grant. The line was vague, but the time was visible at the top, and my body reacted like it had been trained. I did not touch her phone. I did not pick it up. I simply looked at the clock on the wall, looked at the time on her screen, and noted it in my mind. When she returned, she flipped the phone face down immediately, too quickly, a move that admitted what she refused to say. I went to my desk and opened a fresh page in a notebook, and I started a simple ledger. Date, claim, proof, contradiction. I wrote in neat handwriting, because neatness keeps you from turning into a man who looks frantic. I wrote the dinner claim. I wrote the voicemail time. I wrote the merchant alert. I wrote the shared calendar blocks. I wrote the lock screen flash time. Each line felt like another rivet in a structure I could later carry into a room full of witnesses. That night, Elise Halden called again. I watched her number light up on my screen, and I let it ring, because if she wanted to control me, she would have to do it without my cooperation. She left another voicemail, and this one was softer, almost sympathetic, as if she had been coached to switch approaches. She said she understood how misunderstandings happen. She said I should not make this worse. She said people talk, and talk can damage careers. And she said it like she cared about my wife's career more than her own marriage. I saved the voicemail and listened to it twice, and I felt something cold move through me, because the shift in her tone confirmed what my instincts had already suspected. Elise was not calling to protect her marriage. Elise was calling to protect the story, the professional story, the public story, the story where Grant stays clean and Mara stays useful, and I become the inconvenient husband who cannot handle adult relationships. I looked around my living room, at the family photos on the shelf, at the little dents in the couch from years of ordinary life, and I realized that if I tried to win this by emotion, I would lose. They would paint me as the jealous man, the unstable man, the controlling man, and they would do it with practiced smiles and carefully chosen words. But if I won this with documentation, with calm, with lawful proof that anyone could verify, then I would not need their approval. I would only need their silence when the record finally spoke. Mara came downstairs near midnight, wearing her robe, hair damp, face carefully arranged, and she asked what I was doing. I told her I was organizing our paperwork, and she laughed like I was boring. Then she asked, too casually, whether I was saving things about her. I looked up at her and held her gaze, and I told her I save everything that affects my life. Mara's smile faded, and for the first time since the dinner excuse, I saw a flicker of fear she could not fully hide. She told me I was turning into someone she did not recognize. I told her she had started that transformation, not me. She stared at me for a long moment, then turned and went upstairs without another word, and I listened to her footsteps fade, and I knew she was not going to stop. She was going to escalate, because people like Mara always escalate when they feel control slipping. I closed my notebook and placed it in the folder with the printed proofs, and I set the folder on the table where I could see it. Then I opened my phone again and created a draft message I did not send yet. A message to a neutral facilitator I had found through a local community event listing, a person who hosted live discussions and kept minutes because his brand depended on process. I did not send it because timing matters, but I wrote the words and saved them because I could already see the ending taking shape. And as I sat there in the quiet, with the soft glow of my screen and the smell of toner still lingering on my hands, my phone buzzed again with a new message from an unknown number, and this one was not angry or moralizing. It was short, precise, and it contained a detail about my life that nobody outside my home should have known. The message sat on my screen like a fingerprint on glass, small, clean, and impossible to explain away once you admitted it was there. It did not scream, it did not threaten, it did not need to. It simply referenced a private detail from my home life, the kind of detail that only exists inside routine, inside familiarity, inside the lazy confidence of people who think marriage is a sealed container. Whoever sent it knew where my kids had slept over the night before, and whoever sent it knew my sister's first name, and whoever sent it knew the exact time Mara had claimed she would be home. That told me 3 things immediately, and none of them were comforting. First, Mara was talking. Second, she was talking fast. Third, she was talking to people who were willing to use my life as leverage. If this was a misunderstanding, it had already grown teeth. I did not respond to the message. I did not block the number either. Blocking makes you feel in control, but it also removes the chance to watch someone trip over their own words. I took a screenshot of the message with the timestamp visible, because even intimidation has a timeline. Then I wrote the number down in my notebook, not because I expected a magical reveal, but because patterns start with simple repetition. Mara came down for coffee the next morning, as if the night had been normal. She moved around the kitchen with that practiced domestic ease, the same ease she used to convince people she was a good woman because she remembered to buy the right kind of milk. She asked if I slept okay. She asked if I wanted eggs. She asked if I had plans for the weekend. She spoke the way someone speaks when they know they have done something cruel, but they do not want to feel cruel, so they try to bury it under small kindnesses. I watched her hands as she opened cabinets, as she reached for mugs, as she cleaned a non-existent spill with a paper towel. People who are relaxed do not overperform normal behavior. People who are hiding something try to act like a commercial for stability. I asked, casually, whether she had talked to Elise Halden after I sent my message. Mara paused for a fraction of a second, the smallest hesitation, and then she laughed like my question was childish. She said Elise was dramatic. She said Elise made everything about herself. She said Grant had been embarrassed, and that he had told Elise to stop. Mara said all of this with the confidence of someone repeating a story she had already told to someone else. I asked when Grant told her that. Mara's eyes flicked up to mine, then away. She said it was at the office. She said it was yesterday. She said it was nothing important. Nothing again. That soft word that tries to erase your questions by pretending they have no right to exist. I nodded and let it go, because I did not need to win a debate in my kitchen. I needed to win a record in a room full of witnesses. I waited until Mara left for work, and then I opened my laptop and printed the 2 voicemails Elise had left. Not the audio, but the call log entries and the notification screens that showed the times. It was mundane proof, the kind people underestimate, but time is the one thing liars cannot argue with once it is pinned down. After that, I drove to the restaurant named in the merchant alert. It was not a romantic place, not the kind of place you take your spouse when you want to be close. It was the kind of place you take someone when you want to be seen, when you want to buy atmosphere and call it professionalism. The sign outside was tasteful and expensive, the kind of sign that tells you the owner knows the right people. I did not walk in like a jealous husband. I walked in like a man who owns the charge on his account and needs a copy for his records. I approached the host stand and asked politely whether they could provide a duplicate receipt for a transaction that had hit my card. I gave the date and the approximate time, and I kept my voice calm. Calm is the easiest way to make staff cooperate, because calm tells them you are not looking for a scene. The host hesitated, then called a manager. A man in a pressed shirt came out with that professional smile people use when they want you to feel guilty for taking up space. I explained again, slowly, that a charge had posted to my card, and that I needed a copy of the receipt for my personal records. I did not mention Mara. I did not mention Grant. I did not mention marriage or betrayal or anything emotional. I kept it transactional. The manager asked to see identification, which was reasonable. I showed him my license and the last 4 digits of the card on my banking app. He nodded and disappeared into the back. I stood there and looked around the room, taking in the details that tell you what kind of place it is. Low lighting, heavy chairs, tight spacing that forces intimacy, a bar that faces the entrance so anyone walking in gets evaluated immediately. This was not a neutral location. This was a stage. The manager returned with a printed receipt copy. He handed it to me like it was nothing, like it did not contain the proof of my wife's choices. I thanked him and stepped outside, because I did not want the staff watching my face. I sat in my car and read the receipt carefully. The time matched the merchant alert. The total matched the notification. The items listed did not match the idea of a simple work dinner. There were extras that suggested lingering, not eating. There were charges that suggested they stayed long after the last polite bite. And there was one detail that tightened my throat. The check had been split in a way that made it look deliberate, designed to spread risk. Part of it had landed on my card through the shared account, and part of it had been paid by another card. The restaurant had printed the split clearly, because restaurants do not care about your marriage, only your payment. I took a photo of the receipt beside that day's newspaper, because the old tricks still work when the truth matters. Then I placed the receipt into a clear sleeve in my folder and wrote the date on the label. I did not feel triumphant. I felt steadier. Evidence does not soothe pain, but it does reduce confusion, and confusion is the fuel liars live on. On the drive home, my phone buzzed again. Another unknown number. Another short message. This time it suggested I should stop interfering, and it framed the suggestion like advice, like someone wanted to protect me from consequences. It mentioned Mara's job. It mentioned how fragile reputations can be. It mentioned how quickly the workplace can turn on someone. It did not mention the dinner being innocent. It did not mention Grant being respectful. It only mentioned what would happen if I kept noticing. I saved it. I screenshot it. I filed it. At home, I sat at my desk and opened my notebook. I drew a simple table with 4 columns: date, claim, proof, contradiction. Under claim, I wrote Mara's line about a harmless work dinner. Under proof, I wrote voicemail timestamp, merchant alert, receipt copy, split payment detail. Under contradiction, I wrote the mismatch between just dinner and lingering indulgence, the mismatch between 40 years married and split payment strategy, the mismatch between do not be jealous and unknown numbers warning me. I did not pretend the ledger made me feel good. It made me feel clean. There is a difference. That afternoon, I went to the office building where Mara worked. I did not go inside. I did not sneak around like a desperate man trying to catch a glimpse. I waited in the car at a distance and watched the entrance the way you watch traffic, not for romance, but for pattern. People who are hiding something always have patterns, because even deception needs a schedule. Mara exited with a small group, laughing too loudly. Grant Halden walked with them, too close to her, close in that way people can justify as professional if no one has the courage to call it out. They moved toward the parking area, and I saw something else that mattered more than physical closeness. I saw how the group treated them. The group gave them space, the way people give space to a couple, the way people step aside from intimacy they do not want to admit they are witnessing. I did not record it. I did not photograph it. I did not need to. A photo would invite accusations of stalking, and I was not giving them that gift. I noted the time. I noted the vibe. I noted the fact that the social environment already knew. When Mara came home that evening, she said she was tired. She said work was stressful. She said Grant had been demanding lately. She said all of it while keeping her phone in her hand like it was a second pulse. She asked what I did during the day, and her voice carried a thin edge, not curiosity but surveillance. She was checking whether I had moved. She was checking whether I had escalated. I told her I handled paperwork and errands. She asked what paperwork. I told her household paperwork. She asked why I was doing it now. I told her I felt like being organized. She stared at me for a moment, then smiled in a way that did not reach her eyes. She went upstairs and closed the bedroom door with unusual care. Later that night, I received a message from Nina Vale, a woman I barely knew beyond the fact that she worked in the same orbit as Mara and that she did not like chaos. Nina did not message me as a friend. She messaged me like someone leaving a package on a doorstep, fast, quiet, and with the intention of being gone before anyone noticed. She said she did not want trouble. She said she did not want her name involved. She said she only wanted me to know one thing. Mara had used my name that day to justify a private meeting with Grant, a meeting that did not exist on the official schedule. Nina said the office admin had been confused because the room booking made no sense and because Mara had acted like she had permission. I read Nina's message 3 times. Then I saved it. Then I took a screenshot with the timestamp visible. Then I printed it and signed the back because I wanted a paper trail that did not depend on technology behaving the way it should. I did not respond with gratitude. Gratitude invites conversation, and conversation invites risk for Nina. I responded with one line that acknowledged I understood and that I would not use her name unless she chose it. I looked at the growing stack in my folder, at the neat sleeves, the labels, the dates, and I felt the structure tightening. This was no longer about a dinner. It was about misuse of professional space, about coordinated messaging, about intimidation, about narrative control. And the strangest part was that Mara still behaved like the dinner was supposed to be my problem, like my noticing was the betrayal, not her choices. I went to sleep that night with the folder tucked into a drawer that locked, not because I feared Mara would destroy it, but because I wanted to see whether she would try. People show you who they are when they think they can erase consequences. At 3 a.m, I woke to the soft glow of a phone screen in the hallway. I did not move. I listened. I heard footsteps near my desk. I heard a drawer open slowly, then close. I heard the gentle click of my office door, as if someone believed silence could erase guilt. In the morning, the folder was still there, but one sleeve had been handled. It was subtle. The plastic was slightly smudged. The label had a tiny crease. It was the kind of detail only someone like me would notice. I sat down at the kitchen table and drank coffee while Mara chatted about her day like nothing had happened, and I realized she had crossed a line she would later pretend did not exist. She had tried to touch the record. She had tried to see what I had. She had tried to control the narrative by controlling the evidence. And now, she would have to live inside the trap she had built. The first thing I did after Mara left that morning was photograph the folder exactly as it sat, including the smudged sleeve and the creased label. It was not proof of her guilt, not by itself, but it was proof of her interest, and interest tells you where fear lives. I took a photo of the drawer, too, the way it closed, the way the lock sat, because when people get caught later, they love to claim they never touched anything. I was giving her fewer lies to hide behind. Then I called my sister and asked a simple question that felt ugly in my mouth. I asked whether Mara had contacted her recently, and whether Mara had asked any questions about the kids, about schedules, about sleepovers, about anything that could later be used as a shield. My sister hesitated, then said yes, Mara had texted her late at night, checking on the kids, asking whether they were asleep, asking whether they missed their mother. My sister said it seemed sweet at the time. Sweet, I thought, is what people call control when they do not want to see it. I asked my sister to forward the message to me. She did. I saved it and logged it. It placed Mara's mind in 2 locations at once, in my hallway at 3 a.m. and on her phone at the same hour, building a story. People who are innocent do not build stories in the dark. That afternoon, the pressure campaign shifted from private to social. My phone buzzed with a message from a mutual friend, someone who rarely took sides. The friend asked whether everything was okay between me and Mara. The friend said they heard I had contacted Grant's wife and that it had caused drama. The word drama did what it always does. It pushed guilt onto the person who points at the fire instead of the person who lit it. I replied with calm neutrality. I said I was fine. I said I hoped everyone was fine. I said I believed in clear communication. I did not defend myself because defense invites argument, and argument invites rumor to grow legs. Later, Mara came home and mentioned, casually, that people at work were worried about me. She said an HR rep had asked whether I was handling things. She said it like she was concerned, but her eyes were too bright, watching for whether the message landed. This was not care. This was theater. This was her rehearsing the role of the supportive spouse while quietly introducing the idea that I was unstable. I told her I was fine. I asked her whether she wanted to see the receipts, and I asked it like a joke, light, unthreatening, the kind of line that makes a liar's blood run cold because it suggests you have proof without confirming it. Mara laughed too loudly and told me I was being ridiculous. That laugh was useful. Ridiculous is what people call you when they are afraid you are correct. The next step had to be careful. I could not move like a man seeking revenge. I had to move like a man managing facts. Facts travel differently than emotion. Facts can be carried into rooms with policies. Emotion gets thrown out of the room like garbage, so I made my record smaller, not bigger. I took everything I had and reduced it to a single sheet. Date, time, location, proof type. I listed the voicemail timestamps. I listed the merchant alert. I listed the receipt copy. I listed the split payment detail. I listed Nina's message about my name being used for a fake meeting. I listed the unknown numbers. I listed the nighttime interference with my folder. I kept it simple and boring, because boring is the enemy of denial. Then I looked for the arena. Mara had been talking about a company-sponsored community event for weeks. The kind of event that lets executives look generous while building networks. It was going to be streamed, she said, because everything is streamed now, because everyone wants proof they were good people in public. Grant would be there. Elise would be there. Mara would be there. There would be a neutral host, someone tasked with keeping the event tidy. There would be witnesses. There would be a schedule. There would be a record, a stage. I did not tell Mara I planned to attend. I did not need her to prepare. Preparation makes liars smoother. I needed her sloppy. Instead, I contacted the host, Jordan Keene, using the most neutral email I could write. I introduced myself as Mara's spouse. I said I had a documented concern related to professional conduct and public representation. I said I did not want a scene. I said I wanted the correct channel for submitting evidence so the event could remain safe and orderly. I attached nothing. I only asked for process. Jordan replied within a day. His message was polite and cautious. He asked whether this was a legal matter. He asked whether anyone was in danger. He asked whether the content involved harassment. He asked those questions because his job was to prevent chaos from contaminating the brand. I replied with the truth. I said no one was in physical danger. I said there was no illegal surveillance. I said my proof was based on household-level documentation, timestamps, receipts, and witness notes. I said I was willing to submit it for review in advance, but only if it would be handled neutrally, logged, and not altered. I said I was not seeking humiliation. I was seeking correction. That last line was not fully true, but it was true enough. Humiliation was simply the natural outcome of people getting caught in their own lies. I did not have to chase it. I only had to stop preventing it. The week before the event, Mara became strangely attentive at home. She cooked meals she had not cooked in months. She asked about my day with a new softness. She touched my shoulder as she passed, a small gesture that felt like a test of whether she still owned the space between us. She even suggested we plan a weekend trip soon, something romantic, something restorative. The timing made the offer disgusting. I told her we could talk about it later. Later is a word that buys time and reveals intent. Her smile stiffened. She turned away too quickly. She began texting more in the evenings, her thumb moving with a rhythm that looked like panic disguised as productivity. One night, she announced she had to attend another dinner, a group work dinner this time, not one-on-one. She emphasized group the way people emphasize truth when they are lying. I smiled and told her to enjoy herself. The smile irritated her. She wanted anger. She wanted tears. She wanted proof that she could still control my nervous system. She left, and within minutes my phone lit with another unknown message. This one was sharper. It suggested that if I kept pushing, I would destroy my family. It suggested I would embarrass my children. It suggested I would be blamed. The writer wanted to trigger me, because triggered men are easier to paint as dangerous. I saved it and filed it under intimidation. I did not react. 2 days later, Elise Halden called me again, and this time I answered, not because I wanted conversation, but because I wanted to hear her improvise. She began with politeness and quickly slid into pressure. She said people were concerned about my behavior. She said I was misunderstanding things. She said Mara was a professional woman and that I should be proud. She said Grant had been faithful for 40 years, and she said it like she was reading from a brochure. I let her speak until she ran out of breath. Then I asked one calm question. Why did her first voicemail arrive 10 minutes after my message? And why did unknown numbers start contacting me after that? Elise paused, and I could hear the silence where a prepared answer should have been. She recovered quickly. She suggested I was imagining patterns. She suggested someone might be pranking me. She suggested I was reading too much into normal human behavior. Normal human behavior, I thought, does not coordinate intimidation. Normal human behavior does not call a stranger within 10 minutes unless someone is already watching the phone. I thanked Elise for her time and ended the call politely, because politeness is a blade when you use it correctly. Then I saved the call log, saved the timestamp, and wrote down her key phrases. She had used the same words Mara used: concerned, misunderstanding, professional woman. Be proud. That night, Mara asked whether Elise had contacted me. I watched her face carefully as she pretended it was casual curiosity. I told her Elise had checked in. Mara exhaled as if she had been holding her breath. She asked what Elise said. I told her Elise seemed concerned. Mara nodded quickly, satisfied, as if she had just confirmed a piece of her own plan. She went upstairs, and I heard her phone buzz almost immediately. The day of the event arrived with cold weather and clean skies, the kind of day that looks innocent even when people are not. The venue was a studio space dressed up to look like a community benefit, with banners, bright lighting, and staff wearing headsets. The stream would make everything feel permanent, which is exactly why Mara liked it. Permanent looks like protection when you think you control the story. I arrived early. I did not arrive like a husband seeking a fight. I arrived like someone invited, dressed properly, calm posture, neutral expression. I greeted staff politely. I took my seat. I did not stare at Mara when she entered. I did not stare at Grant. I did not stare at Elise. I watched the room. Jordan Keene moved around with a clipboard and the stiff smile of a man trying to keep humans from acting like humans. He saw me and approached, cautious. I told him I had the documentation I referenced, and I asked how he wanted it handled. Jordan said he could log it through his assistant and keep it in a sealed sleeve until the correct moment. He emphasized correct moment because he was still hoping for control. I handed Jordan a slim packet, not thick, not dramatic, just enough to be undeniable. 1-page summary, receipt copy photo, merchant alert screenshot, voicemail timestamps, call log screenshots, Nina's one-line confirmation, redacted, 2 unknown messages, timestamps visible, everything clean, everything boring, everything lethal. Jordan's assistant placed the packet into a clear sleeve and stamped the front with a received mark, the kind of stamp people use when they want to prove they did their job. The stamp landed with a dull sound, and I felt something inside me settle again, because stamped paper is a kind of justice in a world that loves to pretend words are enough. Mara noticed the sleeve. She noticed the stamp. Her eyes widened slightly before she caught herself. She leaned toward Elise and whispered. Elise's face tightened. Grant smiled at someone across the room, still performing calm, still acting like his life was untouched. Jordan began the session with the usual welcoming lines, and the room clapped politely, and the cameras rolled, and the stream went live. Mara sat with perfect posture, hands folded, smiling like a woman who had never lied about anything in her life. Halfway through, Jordan paused and announced a brief procedural note. He said calmly that a concern had been submitted related to professional conduct and public representation, and that he would handle it neutrally, without commentary, and that anyone involved would have a chance to respond on record. The room shifted. People leaned forward. The staff went still, because they could feel the shape of a problem. Mara's smile froze. Elise's hands tightened around her water bottle. Grant's eyes flicked toward the clear sleeve, then back to the camera, then back to the sleeve again, like his mind was calculating whether charm could defeat paper. Jordan lifted the sleeve and said he would read only the header items and timestamps, not opinions. He read the date of the dinner charge. He read the time. He read the fact it hit a shared account. He read the receipt split detail. He read the timestamps of Elise's voicemails. He read the timestamps of the unknown messages. He read Nina's note as a neutral statement about a meeting claim that did not exist. He did not read names that did not need to be read. He did not dramatize. He did not accuse. He simply placed the truth on the table. Mara tried to speak, but her words came out as a soft appeal instead of an explanation. Grant attempted to redirect toward professionalism, toward reputation, toward how unfair it was to air private matters. Elise tried to interrupt with moral outrage, but the room had already shifted, because stamped documentation has a gravity that performance cannot lift. Jordan then read the ethics complaint intake number I had filed earlier that week, not because he loved drama, but because the number proved this was not a jealous tantrum. It was a documented channel. It was a process. It was a record. When Jordan finished, he asked one question, a simple one, the kind of question that should have had a simple answer if the dinner was what they claimed. He asked whether Mara could confirm the actual purpose of the dinner and why the payment split occurred across 2 cards. Mara looked at Grant. Grant looked at Elise. Elise looked at the camera. For a moment, none of them spoke, and that silence was the loudest thing in the room. I did not smile. I did not gloat. I did not say anything. I just watched them sit inside the trap they had built, a trap made of small lies stacked so high that a single stamped sleeve could pull the bottom out. And as the room waited for them to explain, I felt my phone buzz in my pocket with one final message from an unknown number, short and desperate, arriving too late to matter. The message that buzzed in my pocket felt like a last cough from a dying animal, desperate noise arriving after the gunshot already echoed through the room. I did not check it, because I did not need to, and because whatever it said would only be another variation of the same theme. Stop, retreat, feel guilty, let them survive the night. I kept my hands visible on my lap, kept my posture calm, and kept my face neutral, because neutral is what scares people who are used to steering emotions. The silence after Jordan's question stretched in a way that made everyone suddenly aware of their own breathing, as if the room had turned into a courtroom without a judge, and the only verdict that mattered was whether the story held. Mara stared at Grant like a student waiting for the teacher to rescue her, and Grant stared at Elise like a man checking whether his legal shield still covered his throat. Elise's eyes flicked from the sleeve to the staff to the audience, her mind working fast because she understood something Mara did not. When the record exists, charm becomes a liability. Grant tried to speak first, and he did it with the same voice you would use for quarterly earnings, smooth, calm, and mildly offended, that anyone would ask him to explain a thing he believed he owned. He framed the dinner as professional, framed the payment split as convenience, framed the whole moment as a private marital issue being dragged into a public event by an insecure spouse. The room did not relax. If anything, it tightened, because everyone could hear the mismatch between his corporate tone and the messy details stamped into the sleeve. Jordan did not argue with him. Jordan did not accuse. Jordan simply held the paper up again and repeated the question, with the same patience you use on a child who keeps changing the story. Why did the payment split across 2 cards, and why did the wife's voicemail arrive within 10 minutes of the text, and why did unknown numbers begin messaging immediately after? Those were not emotional questions. Those were timeline questions. Timeline questions do not care how respected you are. Mara finally spoke, and her voice came out smaller than she intended, a soft, pleading sound dressed in confident vocabulary. She said she had not meant anything by it. She said she had only wanted to support her career. She said she had been under pressure. She said her boss had been stressed. She said the split payment was to avoid billing issues, to keep things clean, to keep things simple. Clean and simple, she claimed, while sitting under a stamped sleeve that proved the opposite. Elise leaned forward then, and her tone shifted, because she realized the room's sympathy was not flowing where she expected. She tried to position herself as the reasonable spouse, the long-suffering wife, the woman protecting her husband from a jealous stranger's claims. She pointed at the word inappropriate again, pointed at professional environment again, as if repetition could erase timestamps. But the audience had already seen the stamp in the sleeve, and that stamp did something important. It turned this from gossip into a documented submission. It made the room responsible. Jordan handled it the way a competent facilitator handles a spill. He reduced it to procedure. He said the record would be logged, and he said any internal review would proceed through established channels, and he said the session would resume. He did not invite debate. He did not invite speeches. He did not invite a meltdown. He announced a short recess so staff could confirm the logging, and he instructed everyone to remain professional. His voice carried the clean authority of someone whose reputation depends on order. People stood, chairs scraped, whispering erupted like steam finding a crack. Mara rose quickly and stepped toward Jordan, her face already shifting into a version of outrage designed for witnesses. She reached toward the sleeve as if she could reclaim it, as if she could return the record to the private darkness where lies survive. One of the staff moved in front of her, not aggressive, just firm, and Mara's hand froze in midair. It was a small moment, almost nothing, but it had a specific kind of humiliation in it, the humiliating realization that the evidence was no longer hers to control. Grant took a step too, and a security staffer appeared at his side, again calm, again professional, and suddenly Grant looked like a man who had never been denied anything until this exact minute. Elise's face tightened as she watched the security staff treat her husband like a risk, and that treatment was the real insult. More than my paper, more than my silence. In her world, Grant was the one who decided which rules applied. Now a headset-wearing stranger was deciding. Mara turned her head slightly and looked at me across the room, and for the first time that evening her eyes held something raw and honest. It was not remorse. It was panic. Panic is what happens when you realize the story you rehearsed will not play, because the audience has a different script in their hands. I did not stand. I did not approach her. I did not speak. I simply met her gaze and let it sit there, steady and unblinking, because the hardest thing for a liar to endure is a witness who refuses to perform. Elise moved toward me instead, closing distance with the controlled fury of a woman used to winning social battles with a smile and a tone. She lowered her voice and spoke fast, the way people speak when they want to threaten without leaving a clear footprint. She implied that I was harming children, harming careers, harming stability. She implied that I would regret this, not because of law, but because of community. She implied that people like her do not lose quietly. She did not say the dinner was innocent. She did not say Grant and Mara had done nothing. She only attacked the act of exposure, because that was the only argument left. I listened without reacting. Then I stepped back slightly, creating space, because space matters when people want to provoke you into looking volatile. I kept my hands open and my voice mild when I answered her, and I said that the record had been submitted through proper channels, and that I was not there to argue, and that she could address any concerns with the facilitator. That sentence was a door closing in her face politely, and she hated it. When the recess ended, the stream resumed, and Jordan guided the session back into its planned content with the calm urgency of a pilot avoiding turbulence. People clapped too loudly, the way they do when they want to convince themselves the awkward moment is over. But it was not over. It had only moved from the public room into the private corridors where consequences get assigned. Mara barely participated after that. She sat rigid, eyes fixed forward, as if she believed stillness could undo the record. Grant remained composed on the surface, but I watched his jaw tighten each time staff whispered near him. Elise maintained her smile, but it looked brittle now, like glass under pressure. When the session ended, I left without lingering. I did not wait by the exit. I did not watch Mara's face for extra satisfaction. I walked out into the cold air and let it clear my head because I needed to be sharp for what came next. The exposure was only the first phase. The justice was a process, and processes are where people like Grant build their fortresses. My phone buzzed again as I reached my car. This time it was a voicemail from a number I recognized, not personally, but structurally. It was the company's public HR line, the kind of number that exists to make everything sound official. I did not play it yet. I did not move. I stood beside my car and stared at the dark window glass, seeing my reflection layered over streetlights, and I felt the shape of the next trap forming. I drove home and kept my speed steady, because adrenaline makes men do stupid things. Mara did not come home immediately, which I expected. She would be huddled in a circle of damage control, coached by people who knew the language of blame and reputational triage. She would be told to portray me as unstable. She would be told to mention privacy and boundaries and harassment. She would be told to emphasize how hurt she was by my actions. She would not be told to tell the truth. Truth is a liability in a room full of professional survivors. At home, I sat at my desk and played the HR voicemail. The voice was polite and clipped. The caller said they had received a report involving a public event and that they wanted to discuss it to ensure safety and compliance. Safety and compliance, the corporate holy water they sprinkle on everything they want to control. The caller requested that I attend a meeting the next morning, and they framed it as optional while making it sound mandatory. They also asked that I bring any relevant materials because they wanted to understand the context. I listened again, and I smiled once, a small private smile, because they had made the mistake I was hoping for. They had reached out first. They had created an official invitation. They had given me an HR meeting invite without my asking, and now the process belonged to the record, not to rumor. I replied by email, short and neutral, confirming I would attend, confirming my materials were household level and legally obtained, and confirming I wanted a clear note of who would be present. I asked for a written agenda. I asked for a note-taker. I asked for a case number. Those requests were not aggressive. They were procedural, and procedural requests make people nervous when they plan to manipulate you. Mara came home after midnight. She entered quietly, then stopped when she saw I was awake. Her face looked tightened, as if she had been holding expression for hours, and now it could finally drop. She said we needed to talk. I told her we could talk, and I kept my voice calm, because calm forces the other person to reveal their own temperature. Mara began with accusation, because accusation is her comfort zone. She said I humiliated her. She said I embarrassed her at a public event. She said I damaged her career. She said I crossed boundaries. She said I was controlling. She said I was cruel. She said all of it quickly, stacking words like sandbags, trying to stop the flood of her own guilt. I asked her one question, slow and specific, because specific questions slice through performance. I asked whether she could explain the split payment and the lingering charges on the receipt. Mara's mouth opened, then closed. She looked away and said it did not matter. She said it was not what I thought. She said she had been manipulated by Grant. She said she had been under pressure. She said Elise was unstable. She said the office was toxic. She said everything except a clear denial. Then she shifted tactics. Because she is skilled. She softened. She said she was sorry I felt hurt. She said she loved me. She said she had only been trying to keep her job. She said I was overreacting. She said she was scared. She reached for my hand. I did not pull away sharply. I simply kept my hands where they were, because sharp movements become stories. Mara's eyes filled, but the tears looked delayed, like the ones you produce when you want a scene to end. She said she never slept with Grant. She said it had never gone that far. She said it was just dinners, just meetings, just professional. And that was the exact moment my mind clicked into a different shape, because she had just given me something she did not mean to give me. She had denied sex specifically, in a conversation where I had not accused her of sex. Liars volunteer the detail they fear. Truthful people answer the question asked. I nodded slowly, as if I accepted her statement, and I told her we would handle things through appropriate channels now. Mara's face shifted again, anger flaring through the tear mask. She said I was trying to ruin her. I told her she had built the conditions, and I had simply stopped looking away. Mara went upstairs and slammed the door hard enough to shake a picture frame in the hallway. The house went still again, but it was a different stillness now, a stillness full of pending consequences. I slept lightly and woke early. I dressed carefully, the way you dress for a hearing, not flashy, not sloppy, just respectable. I printed the one-page summary again. I printed the HR voicemail log entry. I printed the calendar PDF. I printed the receipt photos. I placed everything in a slim binder because slim suggests control and thick suggests obsession. Then I drove to the HR office without rushing, because rushing is a form of fear. The office building was clean and cold, with glass walls that made everyone visible, because visibility is supposed to prevent misconduct, even though it usually just shifts misconduct into subtler forms. An HR coordinator met me at the front and escorted me to a conference room. Inside were 3 people: the HR chief, a compliance rep, and a note-taker with a laptop. The HR chief introduced herself as Dana Mercer, and she wore the smile of someone who has ended careers without ever raising her voice. Dana began by asking me to describe what happened at the event, and she asked it as if she had no context, as if she had not already watched the stream clip, as if she had not already spoken to Grant. I told her the simplest version possible. I said I submitted household-level documentation to the facilitator, and the facilitator logged it. I said the facilitator read timestamps and payment facts neutrally. I said I did not disrupt the event. I said I did not touch anyone. I said I did not threaten anyone. I said I left when it ended. Dana asked why I contacted Elise in the first place. I told her I received a dinner claim that sounded inconsistent with prior behavior, and I chose a neutral message to the spouse because I believed spouses should be aware of one-on-one dinners presented as harmless. Dana nodded as if she understood, but her eyes were measuring whether she could label me as an aggressor. Dana asked about the unknown numbers. I told her they began immediately after Elise's voicemail, and I provided screenshots with timestamps. Dana's expression changed slightly then, because intimidation outside corporate systems is messy, and messy things make HR nervous, not out of compassion, but out of liability. Dana asked whether I had any reason to believe Mara's job performance was affected. I told her I had reason to believe my name was used to justify a private meeting that did not exist on the official schedule, and I provided a redacted written confirmation from a coworker. I did not say Nina's name. I did not need to. Dana asked for the co-worker's identity anyway, and I declined politely, stating I would not expose a third party who feared retaliation. The compliance rep looked up sharply at the word retaliation, because corporate rooms react to words like that the way animals react to scent. Dana then asked a question that revealed the real agenda. She asked whether I intended to continue involving third parties or appearing at work-related functions to pressure the situation. I smiled slightly and told her my intent was documentation and process, not pressure, and that I would follow any reasonable boundaries provided they applied equally to all parties. Dana held my gaze for a moment, and I could see she did not like that sentence, because it removed her ability to isolate me as the problem. The meeting ended with Dana stating they would open a formal review, and that they would contact relevant individuals, and that they would advise me not to contact employees directly. I told her I understood, and I asked for the case number and a written summary of the meeting. Dana agreed, and that agreement mattered, because written summaries have a way of surviving when people try to rewrite conversations later. As I stood to leave, Dana added one final remark, almost casual, as if she could not resist. She said that Grant Halden had been a stabilizing force in the company for decades, and that she hoped I understood the seriousness of accusations against someone like that. Her words were meant to intimidate, meant to remind me of hierarchy, meant to suggest I should back down. I looked at Dana and told her that stability without truth is just a long lie, and that documented facts do not care how long someone has been respected. Dana's smile tightened, and for the first time in that room, I felt like I had pushed a finger into the real wound. Outside the building, my phone buzzed with a message from Mara. She said we needed to present a united front. She said the company would protect Grant. She said I was making enemies. She said we could fix this privately if I stopped now. I did not respond. I drove home, opened my folder, and added the HR case number to the top of the ledger, because the game had shifted from marriage to institution, and institutions have rules that can be used like knives when you know how to hold them. Mara tried to reset the world with breakfast, which is what people do when they want to pretend the night did not happen. She cooked eggs, placed them on plates, and spoke in a careful tone about ordinary plans, as if the smell of toast could erase the stamp on that sleeve. She asked whether I wanted to take the kids to the park later. She asked whether we should visit my parents this weekend. She said family in a way that sounded like insurance. I listened, nodded when appropriate, and watched her hands shake slightly as she poured coffee. Mara was not calm. Mara was calculating. She was building a narrative in real time, trying to produce the version of herself that will look best when the story escapes the house. The problem for her was that the story had already escaped, and it had left receipts behind. That afternoon, my sister called me again, voice low, because she had received a message from Mara asking strange questions. Mara wanted to know who had been with the kids at the sleepover, who had visited, who had stopped by, whether anyone had seen Mara drive by. Those questions were not about motherhood. Those questions were about reconstructing a timeline, about making sure there were no uncontrolled witnesses. My sister sounded uncomfortable admitting it, because people hate admitting they have been used. I thanked my sister and asked her to forward the message again. Then I printed it and placed it in the folder. The folder was becoming less about betrayal and more about pattern, because patterns are what institutions cannot ignore once they fear public exposure. Later, a call came from Nina again, and this time she did not hide behind vagueness. She told me carefully that the office had been buzzing since the event, and that Mara's story was already being shaped. Nina said Mara was telling people that I was unstable and controlling, and that the dinner was innocent, and that Elise had overreacted to my message because she was paranoid. Nina said Grant was acting offended, like the victim, and that Elise was aggressively contacting staff, demanding loyalty, demanding silence, demanding that people frame the incident as harassment. Nina then said one sentence that hit harder than the rest because it revealed who the real machine was. Nina said Elise had not been surprised by the event submission at all. Nina said Elise had been prepared. Nina said Elise had brought her own folder as if she expected documentation to appear and wanted to counter it immediately. That was the first major twist, and it did not arrive with fireworks. It arrived with quiet clarity. Elise was not a shocked spouse discovering a betrayal. Elise was a partner in containment. Everything suddenly aligned. The 10-minute voicemail, the tone shift between voicemails, the unknown numbers, the corporate HR line contacting me quickly, the language overlap between Mara and Elise. Elise was not defending her marriage. Elise was defending Grant's system, because Grant's system protected her status. A 40-year marriage can be a love story, but it can also be a business model. I did not tell Nina my conclusions. I thanked her and ended the call quickly, because Nina had already risked enough by stepping outside the safe fog. Then I sat alone in my office and replayed Elise's first voicemail again, listening for what I had missed. Her phrasing was not emotional. It was legal adjacent. It sounded like the opening lines of a complaint. It sounded like a record she wanted to create, a record that made me the aggressor and her the concerned party. Elise had used my message to justify a preemptive strike. That meant the goal was not only to protect Grant. The goal was to flip the narrative so cleanly that any future proof would be dismissed as a jealous husband's campaign. If they could label me as unstable, then my receipts become obsession. If they could label me as harassing, then my documentation becomes stalking. If they could label me as controlling, then Mara's affair becomes escape. This was not only about a dinner, it was about a story war. So I made a decision that felt both cold and necessary. I stopped speaking privately to Mara about the truth. I stopped trying to get her to admit anything. Admission is what she would later deny. Instead, I moved everything into written process. Written process is the only place a liar can drown without being rescued by charisma. I scheduled a mediator consult, not for drama, but for structure. I did not seek revenge terms. I sought boundaries, custody stability, and financial separation in a way that reduced leverage. I filed a civil request for account separation, not as punishment, but because my money had already been used as a prop in their performance. I obtained a filing receipt and placed it in the folder. The receipt did not scream. It simply existed. When Mara discovered the account separation request, she erupted, and the eruption was the second time I saw the real Mara, the one she hides under professional polish. She demanded explanations. She demanded trust. She demanded I stop. She said I was destroying the family. She said I was ruining her life. She said I was acting like a monster. I let her speak until she ran out of air. Then I told her calmly that the family was not destroyed by a receipt or a filing, and that it was destroyed by choices made in the dark, choices that required coordinated intimidation afterward. Mara's face went pale, because the word intimidation was not one she could rebrand easily. That evening she tried a different approach, one that was almost clever. She suggested we attend my parents' dinner as usual, and she said it would show everyone we were stable, and she said stability like it was a shield. I agreed, because family dinners are where liars either perform perfectly or crack under real eyes. And I also agreed because I suspected Mara needed the dinner for another reason. She needed witnesses to her hurt, witnesses who would later say I had been cold and cruel. We arrived at my parents' house with the kids in tow, and Mara immediately played the charming daughter-in-law, smiling, helping in the kitchen, complimenting my mother's food. My father greeted Grant and Elise warmly in photos at charity events, but my father's warmth in his own home is different. My father notices details. He notices tone shifts. He notices tension under smiles. The dinner began normally, but the air around Mara was tight, and I could feel her monitoring me, waiting for me to slip, waiting for me to look angry so she could point and say, "See, this is who he is." I stayed calm. I stayed quiet. I helped the kids with their plates. I asked my father about his week. I let Mara work hard for her mask. Then my mother asked a simple question about Mara's work event, because my mother had seen the stream clip circulate among friends, and my mother is not the kind of woman who pretends she does not know. My mother asked what happened, and Mara laughed too loudly and said it had been a misunderstanding, and she said a jealous husband had tried to create drama. She said jealous husband while looking at me, because she wanted the room to accept that label. My father did not accept it. My father asked calmly whether there were receipts. He asked it like a practical man, not a gossip. Mara hesitated. I watched her hesitate. My father then asked, still calm, why Elise would call me within 10 minutes if everything was innocent. Mara's eyes flicked. Her mouth tightened. She began to answer, then stopped. She looked at me again, pleading silently for me to rescue her, because she was used to me absorbing discomfort to protect the illusion of peace. I did not rescue her. I did not attack her either. I simply said, in a steady tone, that there was documented information and that it was now in a formal review process, and that I would not turn family dinner into an investigation. My restraint annoyed Mara more than any accusation would have, because restraint made me look adult, and made her look like the one trying to spin. My mother asked whether Mara had been unfaithful. Mara's face changed, not into sorrow, but into offended outrage. She said, "Of course not. She said she would never. She said she had been loyal. She said the dinner meant nothing. She said I was paranoid. She said I had crossed lines. She said all the phrases that sound good to people who do not hold paper. My father asked one more question, the one that mattered most. He asked why unknown numbers would message me after Elise's voicemail, if everything was harmless. Mara's breath caught, and for a moment she looked like a person realizing the script is missing pages. She recovered quickly, saying it was probably pranksters, probably trolls, probably nothing. Nothing again, the favorite word of weak explanations. The dinner ended in a strange quiet, not because anyone had shouted, but because everyone could feel the truth pressing against the walls. On the drive home, Mara accused me of humiliating her in front of my parents. She said I had made her look guilty. She said I had destroyed her relationship with my family. I told her, calmly, that I had not made her look like anything, and that her own answers had done the work. Mara's hands tightened on her purse strap, and she stared out the window like she was rehearsing her next strategy. When we reached home, Mara went upstairs and stayed there for a long time. I heard drawers opening, closets moving, the subtle sounds of someone preparing for contingency. Later, when she came down, she said she was going to stay with a friend for a few days, to give us space, to calm things down. She framed it like maturity, like self-care, like dignity. I asked which friend. Mara hesitated. Then she gave a name that did not match the unknown number's area code, a name that did not match her calendar blocks, a name that felt chosen, not true. I did not argue. I told her to take what she needed for the kids, and I told her to keep communication in writing. Written communication makes people careful, and careful people reveal the truth slower, but they also reveal it more cleanly when they slip. After she left, I returned to my office and opened the drawer where I kept the folder. I removed the sleeves and looked at the stamped received mark again, because that stamp was the center of gravity now. It was the thing they could not delete without leaving their own fingerprints. It was the thing that had forced HR to call me. It was the thing that had turned Elise's performance into a liability. My phone buzzed with an email from Dana Mercer, the HR chief. The subject line included the case number. The body confirmed the meeting occurred. It confirmed the participants. It confirmed that the company had opened a formal review. It also included one line that showed the machine's next move. Dana wrote that she had received a counter-complaint alleging harassment and reputational harm, and that she would need to evaluate all sides. There it was, clean and predictable. Elise's folder, Grant's system, Mara's narrative. I printed Dana's email and placed it in the binder. Then I opened my notebook and wrote one more line under contradiction. Counter-complaint filed after stamped evidence appeared. I sat back in my chair and felt the calm return, because the next phase was not about proving the dinner was inappropriate anymore. The next phase was about proving they coordinated intimidation and narrative control, and that coordination is what destroys reputations inside institutions, because institutions can forgive affairs, but they do not forgive liability. And in that moment, I understood what the late twist would have to be, even if I did not yet know the exact shape of it. They would try to paint me as dangerous, so I would give them nothing to paint, and I would let their own hunger for control expose them on record. The morning after Mara left, the house felt cleaner in a way that made me suspicious, because clean is what you get when the mess has simply moved elsewhere, and you are the only one still standing near the original stain. I walked through the kitchen, noticed the missing mug she always used, noticed the drawer where she kept her spare charger left half open, and I understood that she had not left in a hurry because she had left with intention, which meant she had left with guidance. I stayed on routine, not because routine comforts me, but because routine makes liars underestimate you, since they expect grief or rage and they struggle when you respond with calendar logic. I packed the kids' lunches, drove them to school with the same quiet music, and kept my face neutral for the teachers who glanced at me like they were trying to read whether the story had reached their group chat yet. At the curb, I watched Mara's absence create a small vacuum, and vacuums are where gossip accelerates because people cannot resist filling empty space with their own theories. When I returned home, I found an envelope on the doormat, plain white, no return address, the kind of envelope that always pretends it is harmless until you open it. Inside was a printed screenshot of my message to Elise, cropped to remove any context, with a marker circle around the word interesting, as if curiosity itself were evidence of wrongdoing. Tucked behind it was a handwritten note, short and childish in its menace, telling me to stop contacting other people's families before someone teaches me manners. I did not feel threatened, because threats are just clumsy attempts to regain control, and clumsy attempts always create fingerprints. I photographed the envelope beside the morning newspaper, photographed the note with the postmark visible, and placed both into a sleeve in my binder. Then I called the school and asked them politely to confirm in writing who was authorized for pickups, because I did not intend to fight in parking lots like a low-budget soap opera while my kids watched. The next message came before lunch, from an unknown number again, and this one was more polished, which made it more dangerous, because polished intimidation is usually the kind someone writes after being coached. The message warned me that the company was taking my behavior seriously, that a harassment complaint was already being prepared, and that I should consider what could happen to custody if I kept acting unstable. They used unstable again, a word people love when they want to avoid discussing facts. I did not respond. I took a screenshot, noted the exact time, and forwarded it to myself with a simple subject line that would read clearly later, "Intimidation text referencing custody." Then I printed the screenshot and signed the back, because when you are dealing with professional liars, you do not only collect information, you build a chain of events that survives their future editing. In the afternoon, I received the calendar invite from Dana Mercer for a follow-up HR meeting, and this one had a new attendee listed, someone titled Employee Relations Counsel, which is corporate for "we brought a lawyer, but we want you to pretend it is normal." I accepted the invite and replied with one sentence asking for confirmation that a note-taker would be present and that any claims against me would be provided in writing before the meeting. Dana responded quickly, agreeing to the note-taker, dodging the written claims request, and suggesting we would discuss the allegations verbally to keep things efficient. Efficient is what people say when they do not want a paper trail. I did not argue. I simply replied that I would attend and that I would bring my documentation for clarity. Clarity is a polite word that still lands like a warning. That evening, Mara called, and her tone was soft and tired, the voice she uses when she wants to make me feel like the villain for not protecting her from the consequences of her own decisions. She said the kids were asking for her. She said she had been overwhelmed. She said she needed time. She said I was making everything worse. She never asked whether I was okay, and she never asked what the truth looked like, because she was not calling to connect. She was calling to manage. I told her I wanted everything in writing, including where she was staying, and I told her it was a custody stability issue, not a marital argument. She snapped then, because the word custody scares people who rely on narrative more than structure. She said I was threatening her, and she said she had done nothing wrong, and she said I was turning her into a criminal. I told her calmly that I was not turning her into anything, and that stability requires addresses, schedules, and clear responsibilities, because children do not thrive inside vague stories. Mara ended the call abruptly, and I sat there listening to the silence after, because her anger was proof that she wanted freedom from accountability, not freedom from conflict. The next morning, I arrived at the HR building early and sat in my car for a minute, watching employees swipe badges and walk inside with coffee cups, unaware that the same building could turn into a courtroom with a new vocabulary anytime someone powerful needed it to. When I entered, the receptionist looked at me with polite caution, which told me the counter-complaint had already been circulated in some form because people do not get cautious unless they have been pre-briefed. Dana greeted me in the conference room with the same controlled smile. The note-taker sat behind a laptop. The compliance rep was there again. The new attendee, the counsel, sat with hands folded, face blank, eyes attentive, the kind of person who never raises their voice because their voice is not the weapon. Dana began by stating the company had received a complaint alleging harassment, intimidation, and reputational harm. And she said those words like she was reading from a menu. Dana asked whether I understood that contacting Elise had caused distress. I said I understood people feel distress when they are forced to answer questions they were never planning to face. Dana's smile twitched. The counsel made a small note. Dana asked whether I had contacted anyone else in the company. I said I had not contacted any employees directly, and that I had limited my actions to documented submissions through the public event facilitator and to responding to HR outreach. Dana asked whether I had attended the event with the intent to disrupt. I said I attended the event because it was a public event where my household-level documentation would be reviewed neutrally and logged, and because the facilitator could control process better than private confrontation could. Dana attempted to reframe that as intimidation, suggesting that bringing personal matters into a public setting was inherently aggressive. I told her, calmly, that the public setting existed for transparency and accountability, and that the documentation was not personal opinion, but a record of timeline and payment facts. Then Dana shifted into the move I expected, the one where they try to make the husband look emotionally volatile, so they can label the proof as obsession. She asked whether I had ever acted in a controlling manner at home, whether I monitored Mara's movements, whether I questioned her constantly, whether I restricted her social life. Her phrasing was careful, designed to make even a normal marriage sound like a police report if you answer incorrectly. I told Dana I had not monitored Mara, and that the only documentation I collected was household-level and accidental, and that I began documenting after receiving a voicemail and unknown number messages that suggested coordinated intimidation. I told Dana I had screenshots of those messages, and I asked the note-taker to record that I was offering them as evidence of pressure related to the complaint. Dana paused, and that pause was the first sign of discomfort, because she had expected to control the evidence flow, not receive evidence that complicated her narrative. I slid a single page across the table, not a thick binder, not a dramatic pile, just one page with timestamps listed in order, the unknown number messages included, and the envelope incident noted. I said I was not asking HR to solve my marriage, and I was asking HR to note that intimidation references to custody had occurred and that those references appeared connected to the workplace conflict at issue. The counsel leaned forward slightly, because custody references are the kind of complication companies do not like, since they imply that employees are using corporate systems to pressure personal outcomes. Dana asked who sent the messages. I said I did not know, and that I was not claiming a specific identity, and that my point was that they began immediately after Elise's voicemail and escalated after the event submission, which suggested coordination rather than random trolling. Dana tried to dismiss them as unrelated. I asked the note-taker to record that HR was declining to treat intimidation references as relevant, and Dana's smile tightened again. The counsel then asked me a question that sounded neutral, but was actually a trap: what outcome I wanted. They wanted me to say I wanted Grant fired, because then they could frame me as vindictive and irrational. I told them I wanted the documented record to be handled through policy, and I wanted boundaries applied evenly, and I wanted confirmation that my children would not be used as a pressure point. I also stated that I had already scheduled a civil mediator consult for separation terms, because I intended to keep my responses inside lawful channels. Dana asked whether Mara had permission to use my account for any payments. I said she did for ordinary household expenses, and that the dinner payment split was not ordinary. Dana asked whether I had a history of financial control. I said I had a history of paying attention to shared expenses, and that attention becomes unavoidable when someone uses your account to hide a narrative. Dana ended the meeting by stating the company would continue its review and that I should avoid further contact with any involved parties. I agreed. Then I asked politely for a copy of the written complaint against me. Dana said they would not provide it at that time. I asked the note-taker to record that HR refused to provide the written allegations while expecting me to respond to them. The counsel's face remained blank, but their pen stopped for a second, because they understood what that looks like later. When I left the building, I did not feel relief. I felt focus. HR was not a justice system, but it could become a stage where liars make mistakes, because liars always believe they can control every room, and corporate rooms encourage that belief until it collapses. On the drive home, I received a message from Nina, short and tense, asking if I could talk somewhere off the record. We met in a cafe where the lighting was too bright and the chairs were uncomfortable, the kind of place that makes you speak quickly and leave. Nina sat with her back to the wall, eyes scanning, and she looked like someone who had realized too late that loyalty in an office is not a moral issue, it is a survival calculation. Nina told me that Elise had been contacting people aggressively, suggesting that I was stalking, suggesting that Mara was in danger, suggesting that the company should treat me as a security threat. Nina said Grant was acting wounded, telling people he was being targeted by a jealous husband who hated strong leadership. Nina said Mara had been absent from work and that a story was being seeded that she was taking time off for her mental health because of domestic stress. Nina said mental health with the same careful phrasing people use when they want compassion without verification. Then Nina said the thing that made my stomach go cold, not because it surprised me, but because it confirmed the machine. Nina said there was a draft internal email circulating, not sent yet, but being prepared, framing the incident as a harassment event and framing Grant as a victim of external interference. Nina said she had seen the subject line on a co-worker's screen and that it looked like it came from Elise's personal account, not the corporate system, but that it was being forwarded to someone in leadership to handle quietly. That meant the late-stage play was already in motion. Build a narrative of danger, push it through internal channels, isolate me socially, and then use the social isolation to justify whatever civil demands Mara wanted. They were attempting to turn my calm documentation into a reason people should fear me. I thanked Nina, and I did not ask her to steal anything, because stealing would poison everything. I only asked her to keep her eyes open and to write down what she heard and when she heard it, because handwritten timelines from neutral witnesses have a way of surviving when electronic systems suddenly become selective. That night, I returned home and found Mara's wedding ring in the bathroom drawer, placed there like a prop, a symbol meant to make me feel guilty for not begging her to return. I did not touch it. I photographed it where it sat. Then I opened my phone and checked the shared calendar, the one we used for kids' activities and family events, and I noticed that a block had been added for the next afternoon. Appointment, no details, location blank, created by Mara's account. The block itself was not proof of anything. The timing was, because the next afternoon was the time she had claimed she would be attending a friend's birthday, a claim she had texted me earlier in a separate message. 2 stories for the same block, 2 versions of reality for the same hours. People who tell the truth do not need redundant cover. The following day, I received a merchant alert from my own bank app, not a shared notification, but my personal account, stating a small charge had been attempted at a boutique hotel restaurant across town, a place Mara and I had never visited together. The charge did not go through, likely because my account was already separating, but the attempt appeared, time-stamped, clean, undeniable. I stared at the alert, and I felt something close to satisfaction, not because I enjoyed betrayal, but because betrayal had finally started to produce the kind of evidence that cannot be rewritten with tears. I took the screenshot, noted the time, and added it to the ledger. Then I sat quietly in my kitchen, looked at the clock, and realized that Mara's appointment block and the hotel restaurant attempt lined up with perfect cruelty. If Mara wanted to portray herself as the victim of a controlling husband, she should not have used my account as a shadow. She should not have left the truth so close to my hands. And as I watched the minutes tick forward, I understood that the next step was not to chase her, not to confront her, not to show up at a hotel like an amateur trying to catch a lover in the act. The next step was to let the machine run, because machines always break themselves when they are forced to run on documented truth. The next week did not feel like a storm, because storms are honest, and what I lived through was more like a slow leak in the walls, the kind that ruins the house quietly while everyone insists everything is fine. Mara maintained her absence, sending short messages about the kids, about schedules, about what she needed from the house, and every message carried the same undertone. Do not ask where I am, do not ask what I am doing, and do not ask why my stories keep changing. I treated her messages like formal correspondence, responding with clear times, clear options, and clear requests for address confirmation, because when someone wants to weaponize emotion, the best defense is paperwork. She resisted giving her address directly, describing it as staying with a friend, vague and temporary, as if she was a teenager hiding from consequences. I asked again, stating it was required for custody stability and emergency contact, and she replied with an accusation about control. I saved that exchange because the refusal itself was evidence of instability, not mine, but hers. Meanwhile, the social fallout began in small humiliations that would have been laughable if they were not so calculated. Parents at school stopped making eye contact. A neighbor who usually waved began watching me with narrowed curiosity. Someone removed my name from a volunteer list I had been on for years, framing it as an administrative update, while making sure the update was visible to everyone. People did not accuse me directly because accusations create liability, but they shifted their behavior like a silent vote. This was Elise's style, not a direct attack, but a controlled atmosphere where you feel your social oxygen thinning. I did not react publicly. I kept attending school events. I kept showing up on time. I kept being polite, because polite consistency is a kind of armor, and armor is what disarms a narrative that paints you as dangerous. I also began writing down the small changes, not because I intended to litigate neighbor behavior, but because patterns matter when someone claims you are the aggressor while quietly rallying a crowd. The mediator consult happened midweek, in a neutral office with beige walls and a calm receptionist who looked like she had seen every version of betrayal and never been surprised again. I did not go there to beg for sympathy. I went there to build structure around the kids, around the house, around finances, and around the kind of stability Mara claimed to value while refusing to provide an address. The mediator explained the process and asked what I wanted. I said I wanted a temporary parenting schedule that minimized disruption, and I wanted account separation, and I wanted communication in writing only, because intimidation had already entered the picture. The mediator asked whether there had been any threats. I told her there had been unknown number messages referencing custody, and that I had documentation. The mediator did not react emotionally. She simply noted it, which was exactly what I wanted, because emotion can be dismissed, but notes become the ground you stand on later. Mara arrived late to the mediator consult, and when she entered, she wore the face of someone prepared to perform. She looked tired in a way that felt rehearsed, like she had practiced in a mirror how to appear fragile. She said she had been overwhelmed. She said she needed space. She said the work situation had become toxic. She said my behavior had frightened her. She used frightened again, another word designed to trigger protective instincts in strangers. The mediator asked Mara for her current address for the record. Mara hesitated and attempted to avoid it. The mediator asked again, firmer. Mara finally provided an address, and the moment she said it, I recognized it, not as a friend's home, but as a short-stay corporate apartment complex used by executives when they relocate or when they want discretion. Mara saw the recognition in my face and immediately tried to reframe, claiming a friend had arranged it, claiming it was temporary, claiming it was safer. Safer. The room felt colder on that word, because safer is not a logistical detail, it is an accusation disguised as concern. I did not argue with her. I simply asked the mediator to note that Mara had declined to provide an address earlier and had now provided one only under formal request. The mediator nodded and typed, and Mara's expression tightened because she realized her performance was becoming record. After the consult, Mara tried to approach me in the hallway, speaking quickly, telling me we could fix this if I stopped, telling me she was being pressured by Elise and by the company, telling me Grant was furious, telling me Elise was dangerous. She was trying to shift blame onto Elise now, because her earlier strategy had been to align with Elise, and now she needed a new villain to justify her contradictions. I listened, and I asked Mara one question, quiet and direct, the kind of question that feels harmless until it splits a liar open. I asked why my bank alert showed a boutique hotel restaurant attempt during her appointment block. Mara's eyes widened for half a second before she masked it. She said she did not know. She said maybe it was fraud. She said maybe someone stole my card information. She said maybe I was imagining things. She said whatever came first. I told her, calmly, that it was not fraud, because the attempt occurred at a place within 10 minutes of the corporate apartment address she had just given, and the timing aligned with the calendar block she created. Mara's mouth tightened. She leaned closer and lowered her voice, asking why I was tracking her. Tracking. The word again. The trap again. I told her I was not tracking her, and that the bank app alerted me about my own account, and that her choice to use my account was her choice, not mine. Mara's face went flat, and I watched her shift out of pleading and into hostility, because hostility is what people use when they cannot win on facts. That afternoon, as if the universe had a sense of timing, I received an email from Dana Mercer with the HR case number in the subject line again. She stated the company would conduct a final review meeting with relevant parties present, and that I would be allowed to make a statement. The meeting would take place at the company's larger conference space, and a security representative would be present to ensure safety for all participants. Safety again. They were still trying to paint me as a threat. I replied, confirming attendance and requesting clarification that the meeting would include a neutral note-taker, and that any claims about my behavior would be stated on record with documented basis. Dana responded, agreeing to the note-taker and declining to discuss claims in advance. Declining again. They wanted me walking in blind, because blind men react emotionally, and emotional reactions become the headline. I did not walk in blind. Not after Nina. 2 nights before the HR meeting, Nina called, voice shaking, and told me the draft email had been finalized and that leadership was ready to send it if the meeting did not go their way. The email framed the incident as a harassment event, framed Grant as a victim, and framed Mara as a distressed employee seeking support. It also referenced possible restraining measures, not legal, but workplace access restrictions, the kind of measures that make you look guilty even if you have done nothing. Nina said she had heard Elise insist that if I attended the meeting, security should be prepared to escort me out. I thanked Nina and told her not to do anything risky. I did not need her to steal documents. I needed her to stay alive inside that machine, because witnesses are more valuable than leaks. The morning of the HR meeting, I dressed again like a man attending a hearing, because that is what it was. I arrived early and sat in the lobby while employees walked past me, pretending not to stare. Security watched me with professional neutrality, but their presence alone was a message. You are the problem we are managing. Dana escorted me to the conference room. The room was larger than the first one, and the seating arrangement was deliberate. Grant on one side, Mara beside him, Elise behind them, Dana at the head, the counsel present, the compliance rep present, a security staffer near the door, and the note-taker positioned where they could see everyone. It was not a meeting. It was a stage, and I could feel the script waiting to be performed. Grant looked calm, but his calm was aggressive, the calm of a man used to owning rooms. Mara looked fragile again, with red-rimmed eyes and a tissue in hand. Elise looked composed, almost bored, as if she had already decided the outcome. Dana began by stating the purpose, to address the complaint and counter-complaint, to determine whether policy violations occurred, and to confirm boundaries moving forward. Dana asked Mara to speak first. Mara began with the victim narrative, describing me as jealous, controlling, and humiliating. She claimed I had contacted Elise to stir conflict. She claimed I had attended the event to embarrass her and threaten her job. She claimed she feared for her safety. She said all of this without looking at me directly, because she could not handle eye contact when telling lies that large. Dana asked Grant to speak. Grant framed the dinner as mentorship, framed the event as harassment, framed my documentation as a campaign. He implied I had been stalking and monitoring. He implied my actions were reckless and dangerous. He did not deny the payment split. He did not deny the timing. He simply treated those facts as irrelevant compared to my supposed instability. Then, Dana asked Elise to speak, and Elise did what she does best. She used morality as a weapon. She spoke about boundaries, about privacy, about how contacting a spouse was invasive and cruel. She spoke as if my message had been an attack, and she spoke as if the dinner had been a professional necessity. She never said why the voicemail arrived within 10 minutes. She never addressed the unknown numbers. She never addressed the payment split. She only spoke about my tone. Dana turned to me and asked for my statement, and the entire room held its breath like they expected me to explode, because their script required it. I did not explode. I opened my slim binder and removed one page, just one, because one page looks reasonable and stacks look obsessive, and I slid it across to the note-taker first. I said I would keep my statement limited to documented facts and their timestamps, and I asked the note-taker to confirm when they had it recorded. The note-taker nodded. Dana frowned slightly because procedure undermines performance. I stated that my initial message to Elise was neutral and accurate, and that it triggered a voicemail within 10 minutes, which was an unusual response time for a stranger. I stated that immediately after that voicemail, unknown numbers began contacting me with hostile messages. I stated that after the public events submission, those messages escalated and referenced custody, and I provided screenshots with times. I stated that a physical envelope containing intimidation arrived at my home, and I provided photographs of the envelope and note. I stated that I did not contact employees, and that I responded only to HR outreach and attended a public event where the facilitator logged evidence neutrally. Dana interrupted and asked why I believed those messages were connected to the workplace issue. I said because the content referenced HR action, custody outcomes, and my involvement with the company, and because the timing aligned with Elise's voicemail and the event. I did not accuse Elise directly. I did not accuse Grant directly. I simply described a pattern and let it sit in the room like a smell no one could deny. Then I addressed the dinner, but I did it without moral language, because moral language invites debate. I said there was a split payment record, and I said the timestamps aligned with a calendar block and a later bank alert attempt, and I said those facts were why I contacted Elise, because spouses deserve awareness when professional boundaries become unclear. I told Dana I was not asking HR to mediate my marriage, and I was asking HR to note that intimidation and narrative framing had occurred, and that those tactics create liability. The counsel asked me whether I had any proof that any employee sent those intimidation messages. I said I had no proof of identity, and that I was not claiming identity, and that I was presenting them as documented pressure associated with the complaint. Dana looked dissatisfied because she wanted me to accuse someone without proof, so she could dismiss me as reckless. Then I made the move I had been saving, the move that does not require accusation, only logic. I asked Dana to confirm on record whether HR had provided me the written complaint allegations in advance. Dana said they had not. I asked Dana to confirm whether the company had communicated internally about me as a safety concern prior to the meeting. Dana attempted to dodge. I asked again, calmly, stating it was relevant because safety framing influences witness perception. Dana hesitated, then said the company had taken precautionary measures due to the nature of the complaint. Precautionary measures. In other words, they had seeded fear. I asked the note-taker to record that the company framed me as a safety concern without providing me the written allegations and without documented violent behavior on my part. The security staffer near the door shifted slightly, uncomfortable, because even he knew this was about optics, not actual risk. Mara started crying softly, not from remorse, but from the stress of the script collapsing. Elise's jaw tightened. Grant leaned back, crossing his arms, pretending he was above it, but his eyes were sharp now, because he recognized he was losing the clean narrative. Dana ended the meeting by stating they would review the materials and provide a decision. She reminded everyone not to retaliate, and she said it while looking at me, as if I were the most likely to retaliate, which was almost funny. I nodded politely and stood. I did not speak to Mara. I did not speak to Grant. I did not speak to Elise. I left the room the way I had entered it, calm and controlled. In the lobby, Nina was not supposed to be there, but I saw her across the glass wall, passing through with a file in her arms, and our eyes met for a second. She looked terrified, but she also looked relieved, because she had just watched the machine fail to make me the monster they needed. That night, I received a message from Mara that was different from the others, because it was not about kids or schedules. It was about damage control. She said Elise was furious. She said Grant was threatening her career. She said the company would crush her. She said she had only done what she had to do. She asked me to stop pushing, and she offered something in exchange. She said she would tell the truth if I agreed to keep it private and drop the complaints. I stared at the message and felt the late twist taking shape, because only one kind of person offers truth as a bargaining chip. A person who has been lying on purpose. I did not reply. I printed the message and placed it into the binder, because the offer itself was proof that the truth existed and had been withheld. Then I sat in the quiet house, listened to the refrigerator hum, and realized that the next time I walked into a public room with them, they would not rely on performance alone. They would try to force an outcome, and I would have to make sure the outcome happened on record, not in whispers. By morning, Mara's offer sat in my phone like a loaded weapon on a coffee table, quiet until someone pretended it was not there, and I understood the move for what it was, because nobody offers the truth unless the truth is expensive. I did not respond, not because I was unsure, but because I was finally sure, and certainty makes you slow down, because the last mistake in a long game is usually a rushed reply. I took the kids to school, signed the attendance sheet, and smiled at a teacher who suddenly remembered an urgent email, because the rumor machine had already eaten the softer version of me and replaced it with a cartoon villain who sends ominous messages to married women. When I came back, I laid my binder open on the kitchen table, not like a dramatic prop, but like a simple map, because maps are what keep you from walking in circles when someone is trying to herd you into panic. The HR decision email came that afternoon, short and clinical, announcing a final findings session and requiring all parties to attend, with Dana, counsel, and a security representative present, and I noticed that Mara was copied directly, which meant she had not been protected, which meant someone above her had decided she was now expendable. I took a screenshot of the subject line, saved the header, and added it to the ledger, because even scheduling tells you who is being sacrificed. Before I left, Nina texted me one line, and it was the most helpful kind of line, because it contained no emotion and no drama. She said Elise had been telling leadership that Mara would say anything if she felt cornered. That sentence told me everything I needed to know, because Elise was already pre-framing Mara's possible confession as a lie, which is what a controlling person does when she sees her puppet beginning to snap. When I arrived at the building, security treated me like a risk again, but the difference was subtle and obvious at once, because this time they were not watching me with suspicion. They were watching the room with caution, as if the real threat was not me, but whatever might happen when the story collapsed in front of witnesses. Dana escorted me into a smaller conference room than before, and the seating was different, which is how corporations admit fear without saying it, because they rearrange chairs when they cannot rearrange consequences. Grant sat at one end, composed but restless, fingers tapping once and stopping, as if he had to remind himself that he was still the kind of man who controlled meetings. Elise sat close to him, not as a spouse, but as a strategist, calm eyes, tight mouth, posture perfect, as if she could out-discipline any truth with enough poise. Mara sat apart, shoulders tense, hands clasped, face pale, because she had been promoted in someone else's story and then demoted in the real one. Dana began by stating the company had reviewed submissions, timeline documentation, and the nature of the complaint, and she said the phrase "nature of the complaint" like it was a living creature they had contained in a cage. The council added that the company would focus on policy, professional boundaries, and retaliation risk. And I noticed they emphasized retaliation, because retaliation is the corporate word for panic, and panic is what happens when someone powerful loses their shield. Dana summarized findings in a steady voice, and each sentence sounded like a nail going into wood. She stated that the dinner arrangement had violated a managerial boundary policy due to the one-on-one setting, the lack of prior disclosure, and the use of a shared corporate reimbursement category that did not apply. She stated that Grant had attempted to classify the meal as mentorship while splitting payment in a manner inconsistent with company practice, and that the split payment created an appearance of personal involvement. She stated that the company could not prove who sent the unknown number intimidation messages, but that the messages referenced workplace action and custody outcomes, and that the company had logged them as a concern, which was corporate, for we did not like this, and we do not want it near us. Grant tried to interrupt, claiming the split was an error, claiming the policy was vague, claiming the real issue was my harassment, and Dana cut him off politely, which was the sharpest knife she could use in that room. Dana said that the complaint against me could not be supported as workplace harassment because I was not an employee, and because my documented actions remained limited to lawful communication and documented submissions through a neutral public event facilitator. Dana then stated that safety precautions taken against me were procedural and not based on any documented violent behavior, and the council added that such precautions should not be used to frame a narrative. Elise shifted in her seat, the first visible crack, because her favorite trick had been to turn procedure into moral judgment, and now procedure was turning into a mirror. Dana turned to Mara and stated that the company had concerns about misinformation, including claims of abuse and safety fear without documented basis, and that internal messages framing me as unstable had created risk for the company. Mara swallowed hard. Grant stared at the table. Elise kept her face neutral, but her eyes were colder now, because neutrality is what people wear when they are calculating who to throw under a bus. Dana then stated the corrective actions, and they landed in a clean sequence. Grant would be removed from direct supervisory authority immediately and placed on administrative leave pending termination review for cause due to policy breach and inappropriate use of reimbursement and influence. Mara would be placed on a performance improvement plan and reassigned away from the reporting line with a formal warning regarding truthfulness in internal reporting. Elise would be instructed, as a non-employee spouse, to cease contacting staff and leadership about the matter, and the council would send a written notice to that effect, which was corporate's way of saying, "Stop acting like you run this building." Grant's calm finally snapped into something uglier, and he asked whether I thought I had won. And he aimed the question at me like a dare, because men like him always want the conflict to be personal, since personal conflict feels manageable, while policy feels like gravity. I did not raise my voice. I told him this was not a win, and it was a correction, and that he could have avoided it by keeping the dinner what he claimed it was. Elise stared at me, and I could feel her trying to pull me into her preferred story, the story where I am emotional and she is composed, the story where my tone becomes the crime. Then Mara spoke, and her voice shook, and the shaking was real. She said she had been pressured to describe me as controlling, and she said Elise had coached her on wording and told her which phrases would land with HR. She said she had been told that if she framed me as unstable, the company would protect her and the separation would go clean. She said she had been promised help with housing and career if she stayed aligned. She said she did not know the intimidation messages would happen, but she said she recognized some of the phrasing because Elise had used similar wording in private conversations. The room went quiet in the way rooms go quiet when someone finally speaks without permission. Dana's expression did not change, but the note-taker's fingers slowed because even the note-taker could feel the shift from corporate process to personal exposure. Elise finally moved, and she leaned toward Mara and spoke in a low voice that carried anyway. And she told Mara to stop talking, and the order in her tone was more revealing than any document. Mara flinched, and I watched it happen, and I realized the mid-story truth had been sitting in plain sight all along. Grant had not been the only engine. Elise had been driving the narrative like a second manager, shaping language, shaping fear, shaping outcome, because she did not want a messy scandal attached to her image, and she did not care whose life she bent to prevent it. Dana ended the meeting quickly after that, stating that further statements should be submitted in writing, and security opened the door as if the air had become unsafe. Grant stood abruptly, angry, and Elise followed him, face tight, posture rigid, the controlled collapse of a woman who believed she could edit reality. Mara stayed seated, breathing fast, and I did not touch her, did not comfort her, did not offer softness she had not earned, because she was not a victim of me. She was a participant in a plan that only turned on her when it stopped being useful. Outside, in the lobby, my phone buzzed again, and the message came from Elise's number, and it was short and vicious, telling me this was not over and that I would regret humiliating her family. I saved it, because threats after an official finding are just gifts wrapped in rage. I drove home with the kids' pickup time approaching, and for the first time in weeks, I felt the machine slow down, not because it had stopped, but because its main driver had lost the steering wheel. Still, I knew the story did not end at HR, because HR only controls badges and jobs, and Mara still controlled the most important piece: the home, the kids, and the future she was about to bargain for. That evening, Mara requested one more mediation session, urgent, and the mediator agreed to schedule it within 48 hours, and I understood why she wanted it fast. The HR decision had removed her shield. Now she needed a new one, and if she planned to rewrite the story again, she would have to do it in front of a neutral professional with notes. The mediation session was quiet, procedural, and final. Mara arrived diminished, her workplace power gone, leaving only strategy masked as shame. She pushed for a quick, private, soft settlement. I agreed to privacy on personal matters, but refused to bury the documented HR breach or custody referencing intimidation. She pivoted to emotion: loneliness, my distance, confusion turning mentorship into something else, panic, pressure from Elise. I let her talk until the pattern was obvious, then asked one question: Would she state on record that she falsely painted me as controlling and unstable to HR under coaching? Her hesitation answered everything. She said she couldn't phrase it that way. It might ruin her. I reminded the mediator that her refusal undermined trust and requested a temporary order prioritizing routine, school stability, documented communication, and a 30-day review. Mara offered partial admission of mistakes in exchange for my silence on intimidation tactics. I slid forward a single page listing timestamps: Elise's voicemail, unknown messages, envelope, custody threat text, post-finding threat. I stated calmly they existed, were saved, and would stay unused unless false narratives forced my hand. The mediator noted the documentation as context for strict boundaries. Any further coercion would weigh heavily. Mara requested a private safety talk. Mediator declined. Safety concerns go on record, not off. Mara's anger flashed briefly. Proposed terms: I get primary school week custody for stability. Mara gets structured weekends with clear rules, written-only communication, no third-party intermediaries, separate accounts, shared expense ledger. Mara objected. It made her look bad. Mediator: it's about functioning, not appearances. Mara asked if I wanted to punish her forever. I said no. I wanted to stop her from punishing reality. She chose narrative over home. Now she lives inside the structure that narrative demands. She agreed. Agreement signed. Temporary order to be filed promptly. As we left, she whispered, "Keep Grant's termination and Elise's behavior quiet." I told her the point was never gossip. It was ending lies. Her story collapses on its own contradictions when receipts are kept. Outside, Dana Mercer gave a relieved nod. An unknown number text arrived. Smug sociopath, you'll pay. Saved. I drove to school pickup. Other parents stared, still craving drama. I gave them only calm. The loudest revenge isn't noise. It's stability.